Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Owi Osazi. Warm welcome to everyone here with us in person and online all over the world. I'd like to welcome you to our Mental Health Conference 2021. Today is the 12th of 10th, 21. It's World Mental Health Week, World Mental Health number 3. The theme is mental health in an unequal world, the haves and have-nots, and how did we get here? I would like to appreciate our sponsors, University of West Indies, Ministry of Health and Wellness, Western Region Health Authority, National Health Fund, Pan American Health Organization, Surgical, Pfizer, Johnson, Kawani International, Lumber Discounts and Hardware, Kiss Bakery, and Fairfield International, Dr. Dwayne Harvey, Dr. Daniel Jones, Dr. Marshawn Reed, Massa Fancy Builders, Sharon Palmer, Roderick Jarrett. I would now like to hand over to our moderator for the evening, Dr. Johnson Campbell, Coordinator Non-Communicable Disease Program, Western Regional Health Authority. Thank you.
And it is my pleasure to be here with you today for this forum. World Mental Health Day is observed on October 10th every year. The overall objective of the World Mental Health Day is to raise awareness of mental health issues around the world and to mobilize efforts in support of mental health. The day provides an opportunity for all stakeholders working on mental health issues to talk about their work and what more needs to be done to make mental health care a reality for people worldwide. Did you know that the first World Mental Health Day was observed on October 10, 1992? This then became an annual activity of World Federation for Mental Health. Over the years, the themes for World Mental Health Day have highlighted mental health concerns in relation to women, children, health, work, trauma, and suicide. And this year, we look at the theme, mental health in an unequal world. This theme was chosen because the world is increasingly polarized, with the very wealthy becoming wealthier and the number of people living in poverty being still far too high. 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted inequalities due to race and ethnicity, sexual orientation and gender identity, and the lack of respect for human rights in many countries, including for people living with mental health conditions. Many people with a mental health illness do not receive the treatment that they are entitled to and deserve, and together with their families and carers, continue to experience stigma and discrimination. The gap between the haves and the have-nots grows ever wider, and there is continuing unmet need in the care of people with a mental health problem. The Western Regional Health Authority now welcomes you to this forum. Mental health in an unequal world, the have and have-nots. How did we get there? Today, we will highlight the issues affecting two vulnerable groups, our children and adolescents. In part one of today's seminar, we will hear from Ms. Georgia Rose, clinical psychologist, who will speak to us on the topic, Innocence under Arrest, Childhood in the Age of COVID-19. I'm not sure what thoughts come to mind when you hear this topic, but I'm sure that the delivery of this presentation will be thought-provoking, informative, and I dare say inspirational. In part two, we will be engaged in a panel discussion on My Body, Not Yours, the adolescent's right to consent. Have you ever made that statement yourself? It's my body, not yours. Our panelists today will include Mrs. Geneieve Harty, an attorney at law, Dr. Sheila Campbell-Forrester, former CMO and Jamaica public health specialist, Mr. Victor Newsome, principal of Irwin High, and Mrs. Andrea Douglas, a parent. A question and answer session will follow each section, and we expect to come to a close around about 7:30 p.m. Of course, your mics will be muted until time for question and answer, but you can place your questions in the chat. We want you to be present. Don't just log in and then move away to do something else, as some of us are guilty of doing when we are in a Zoom or a virtual presentation. We want you to be present. We want you to participate in the question and answer session at the end. And also, by the end of this session, we want each person to make a commitment towards raising awareness about mental health issues, reducing stigma and discrimination, helping someone who may be in a crisis. And if perchance you are the person going through a crisis, acknowledge same and seek out help. Can I now invite Mr. Wayne Manning from Pfizer Pharmaceuticals to do a 5-minute presentation on behalf of Pfizer, one of our sponsors.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
We are able to hear you, Mr. Manning. Please go ahead.
Are you hearing me?
Very clearly.
Okay. So let me go share. I'm trying to share my screen. Should be coming up anytime now. The organizers of this event to enable us to participate. And this evening I'd just like to share one of the options, a very unique option in treating major depressive disorder. And as you can see from the screen, that molecule is Pristiq, desvenlafaxine. And just to say a little bit about major depressive disorder, we know that the presentation of major depressive disorder varies from patient to patient, and it leading to a range of symptom profiles. Some have impaired function in terms of cognitive, in terms of energy, my apology. There's also patients who may have risk for drug intolerance, the impact that major depressive disorder can have on a patient's ability to continue doing their job. So their occupation may be at risk. Their social functioning may be also impacted. And with Pristiq, we know it's desvenlafaxine succinate, and it's really the major metabolite from venlafaxine antidepressant. And as such, you'll find that the first pass effect on it is minimal. It is presented as 50 milligrams. That's a presentation that we have here, as you can see on the screen to the right. And you can see some of the inactive ingredients. The indications will to treat major depressive disorder in adults, both males and females. And of course, for acute major depressive disorder, and where there's some chronicity involved in the depression, also for maintenance. The mechanism of action, as you can see, it's a dual mechanism acting antidepressant. So it pretty much a potent selective serotonin and also norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which actually help to balance these neurotransmitters within the synaptic cleft, thereby bringing some balance to the patient and help to treat the condition of major depressive disorder that the patient may have. And as we know, these neurotransmitters are key transmitters within the brain and functioning of the patient. The Pristiq dosing, 50 milligram once daily, you can take it with or without food. And the same starting dose is also the same therapeutic maintenance dose for the patient. It can be taken pretty much at the same time each day. And you don't chew the tablet, should be taken whole. Sorry, my apology. A little bit on the pharmacokinetics, half-life just about 11 hours, Tmax 7.5 hours. And importantly, when you look on the metabolic pathway, it's not inhibited, or is it a major, it's not affected significantly by the cytochrome P450 system. So as you can see, the main metabolic route is the UGT conjugation and minor metabolic route through the CP304. No involvement of CP2D6, which we know is an enzyme associated with the metabolism of many compounds. And therefore, you'll find that drug-drug interaction may be less with the Pristiq. Now, as you can see, when we look on the impact of Pristiq on drug-drug interaction, as you can see, it's pretty much right around here, none for the CP2D6, and it's not an inhibitor compared to many of our competitors. So you'll find that drug-drug interaction is minimal. As you can see here, none compared to other antidepressants. Right, now one of the important things about Pristiq is the ability to get the patient responding early. And as indicated there, in patients with major depressive disorder, indicated to treat MDD in both men and women, it improves depressive symptoms in a week. My apology, just going back. Okay, right here, it actually shows that it improves depressive symptoms after just 1 week. And after 8 weeks of treatment, improves by 49% patient productivity. Fatigue, energy improved 44 to 52%. And there's a low risk of weight gain and sexual side effects. So the fact is that it's a unique molecule and every patient may experience depression differently. And because it's a dual mechanism, it allows for very good response for various patient types. And this actually shows from studies where you can see that some major parameters that are measured here. Just back up. Sorry. Right. For example, the depression and the MADRS scale and the disease severity scale, you can see improvement. And these are from 2 studies. And you can see for the 50 milligram, you can see significant reduction, as you can see here, 11.5. And also for the other study, 13.2. So the efficacy of Pristiq is known. And this is from these 2 partner studies, Bayer and Bowit. Functional response, and that's another key component. We want to get the patient responding early, but also to get them to the point of remission, where we are looking on the functioning of the patient. And as you can see on the left here, sorry, functional response, that's a decrease of, right, 61% of the patients experienced improvement there compared to placebo. That's a 50 milligram and that's placebo. And 51% in terms of functional depression response. So what we're saying here, you have early functional improvement at week 2, and by week 8, you are looking at significant functional response, depression response. So the symptoms of depression are actually decreasing. Here again, you are looking on situation, we're looking on 2 different patient types, patients in terms of age group and disease severity. And as you can see, overall, for age, Pristique does significantly better than the placebo. 18 to 40, again, significantly better, and that's in terms of age. And on the right here, you can see in terms of the severity of the disease, again, only for mild diseases where there's any semblance of resemblance between the Pristique 50 milligrams and placebo. Otherwise, overall, for moderate and severe, Pristique does significantly better. So depending on the particular functionality, you can see Pristique will actually help to improve the patient's depressive symptoms and improve functionality. Again, this is actually looking at the mean change from baseline in this particular parameter, Hamilton Depression rating score, 17 items. Week 1, we can see the 50 milligram in blue as against the placebo in orange. This is the 100 milligrams, which is where the indication is 50 milligrams. So what we're seeing here, probability of early improvement, 43% more likely with Pristique 50 milligrams. The effect on neurocognition, and this relates to the ability of the individual to cognitively function. And we know the relationship between cognition and the person to be able to do their job, to function well. And we look at a number of different parameters that were measured. At the top, for example, you have cognitive flexibility. And you can see complex attention. All of these are showing marked improvement from baseline. And all of these parameters help to get the individual cognition ability to be at the very best. And this will enable the person to be able to function in their occupation. And this is actually showing an effect on occupational functioning. At the top here, you see disability at work, the Sheila and disability score. You see P is significant, overall work impairment, and how the Pristique can actually help to improve these particular parameters. So what I'm saying here is Pristique, 1, it allows the patient to respond early. And we know that with early response, it's a predictor to the extent to which a patient may actually achieve remission. This looks at, again, efficacy of Pristique in terms of functioning and well-being. And this is from post-hoc analysis of about 9 multi-centered studies. And again, as you can see on the left, MD17, Madras, looking at lassitude, the Sheila and disability score, looking at work, social, and family. So all of these particular parameters are measured, and you can see the decrease in blue from baseline, which is a 50 milligram, shows how Pristique has actually shown improvement in these particular parameters for the patient, and therefore they're functioning socially, in terms of family, and in terms of their vocation, their job. In terms of mood, you can see more relaxed, good spirit, more interested in things, and so on. In terms of energy and lassitude, looking again on the MD17, and you look at psychomotor retardation, this is again showing decrease from baseline. The blue, the 50 milligram, the gray, 100 milligram, and the orange, placebo. So the parameters again shows the 50 milligram Pristique actually help to reduce the, to improve rather, the functioning of these individuals and giving them the energy that they do need, reducing the lassitude that may be associated with major depressive disorder. So we say here, early improvement at week 2 in energy and lassitude is associated with excellent treatment outcomes and functional recovery. So the prestige key points here is that, one, it does relieve depressive symptoms. You have early symptomatic improvement from week 1, improve functional outcomes, and we are talking about cognitively, socially, and vocationally. And it also delays relapse. It has low risk of sexual side effects and low risk of weight gain. And the therapeutic dose is the same dose that you actually start with, 50 milligram once daily. And because of its unique metabolism, there's low potential for drug-drug interaction. So for those polypharmacy patients who may have comorbid issues and are on other drugs, the potential for drug-drug interaction is actually less. So in summary, the indication, management of major depressive disorder in adults, both males and females, the pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic highlight once daily dosing and simple metabolic profile with low potential for drug interaction. The efficacy of the 50 milligram have been evaluated in large, major, randomized control trials. And their trials practically shows that it improves the depressive symptoms, improves the functional outcomes, and it prevents relapse in patients with major depressive disorder compared to placebo. Early clinical or functional improvement of prestige 50 milligram is a predictor for later treatment success. So I was saying from the very beginning, early response, we find that by week 1, patients are showing improvement in depressive symptoms, which is an indication that they are likely to achieve remission. The low risk of weight gain and sexual side effects is also a very good benefit. It makes it more tolerable for your patients, and that will, of course, impact their adherence to therapy. And I think that's it. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Manning, for that presentation. And thank you so much for Pfizer for having come on board to sponsor. We are always grateful to our sponsors, and in particular Pfizer. And if it is that you have not yet received your vaccine, well, we don't have any more Pfizer vaccine for you, for your COVID-19 vaccine, but certainly the others are available. Thanks again. We want to move further into our seminar, and we are anxiously awaiting the presentation from Ms. Georgia Rose. Georgia Rose is actively involved in mental health, education, and early childhood development. She holds a Master of Science degree in clinical psychology and is currently pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy in infant and early childhood development. She has been providing service in child and adolescent mental health for over 15 years in the Western region, and in 2015 was recognized by the Special Education Unit of the Ministry of Education for unrelenting and untiring service to special education. She is actively engaged in community service and sits on the board of the Peace Management Initiative of St. James. She's a consultant on the Ethics Review Board for kidney transplants in Western Jamaica, and also the bariatric surgery team. Ms. Rose is also the chairman for the St. James Red Cross and has conducted numerous psychosocial support trainings across the Caribbean on behalf of the International Federation of the Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Unit, especially with a focus on the impact of trauma on children and adolescents. She lectures psychology at the undergraduate level and has presented on numerous topics related to child and adolescent mental health. She is passionate about the promotion of healthy development in children and adolescents. So let us welcome Ms. Georgia Rose with her presentation at this time.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for that lovely welcome, Dr. Marcia Johnson Campbell. I would like to thank everyone for affording me the opportunity to be with you here this afternoon. And I'm looking forward to our presentation. I want us to stop to take a moment to reflect on what our childhood was like. When I think of my own childhood, it conjures up so many memories, the good and the bad. What I remember most favorably is the times that I would have gone to visit my grandmother in rural Clarendon, and the many opportunities I would have had with my cousins to visit the river and to get in all sorts of trouble and to be disciplined accordingly. I also think about the times attending school and having fun with my friends. And as an adult, I reflect on that quite often, and I like to say that my childhood was lovely. It was not colored by wealth and a lot of material things, but it was quite a meaningful experience for me. So my name is Georgia Rose once again, and I want you to join me as we discuss the developmental impact of the ongoing pandemic on normal or typical childhood development. Of the 77 million children worldwide, an estimated 1.8 trillion hours of in-person learning and developmentally supportive interaction has been lost. Now, that is a very alarming figure. And this figure was shared by a recent report that was released by UNICEF. And if we've lost over 1.8 trillion hours of in-person stimulation, there has to be some deleterious effects being felt by this group. Now, historically, inequalities in childhood have always been present, but we know that this has been magnified as a result of the pandemic. We have always existed in a space of haves and have-nots. And what the pandemic has unceremoniously unveiled is a gross disparity between both. Now, while all children have been adversely affected by the pandemic, those who exist in the most vulnerable spaces have arguably been the most affected. And I want to pause to make sure that I highlight this. The purpose of this presentation is not to chastise those of us that have been privileged to meet the needs of our families during this difficult time, but to highlight that we have failed as a society to protect the others who have not been so privileged. With the closure of schools across the globe in response to the pandemic, supportive pillars of childhood development have been eroded. Lee states that what the pandemic has done is to thrust into the spotlight the essential function of schools within a society. Schools, he argues, is more than just a basic need. They are support beams within which the architecture of our social space is able to be constructed. Schools support all other external roles within any efficient society. And I dare say that parenting has historically and traditionally never been a singular act. Parenting has always been a collective effort. And when individuals enter into the role of parents, there is an assumption, there is a belief, and maybe we're entitled as parents, that we will not have to go at it alone, that there will be agencies and resources at our disposal to help us move through this difficult journey. So many of us, when we embarked on this road of becoming parents, we thought we would not have been alone. And what the pandemic has done is to have left many parents, many families in a space of isolation. Those that do not have the resources at their fingertips to moderate the demands and the stresses associated with this ongoing social issue. Working class families have historically struggled to provide meaningful childcare in their dual roles as nurturers and providers. As parents and guardians, we depend on agencies such as the school, aftercare centers, and any other support agency to help us provide safe support spaces for children. As parents, we cannot work and provide childcare at the same time. Many of us do not have that luxury. I work in infant and early childhood mental health, and I think I've been privileged in a very humble way to have had parents share their difficult stories with me. And I always like to state on any platform that I'm afforded that I personally believe as a clinician, as a parent, that most parents are good parents. Most parents ultimately want the best for their children. Most parents are trying their hardest to do what they believe to be the best job. And I've had many parents who've broken down and shared how difficult this period has truly been for them. I don't think we want to have an honest conversation, because an honest conversation is going to make us very uncomfortable. An honest conversation is going to highlight the deficiencies and the failures within our system and the areas in which each of us are responsible for having failed each other. There are many children that are being left alone on a daily basis because parents do not have access to quality and safe, reliable childcare. So the safety of our children has been compromised. Not every parent works in a space where they can take their child with them. Not every parent has an occupation that affords them to work from home. Not every parent has the community support to have somebody watch over their child. And I like to say it like this. We might give families tablets, but there's no data. We might give them data, but there's no device. And you might have device and have data, but not have any internet. And you might have the device, the data, the internet, all these things, but don't even know how to begin to use the system that has been thrust upon us. And I don't believe that I have heard any solid argument or any plan or measure that says, this is what we are doing to assist our parents. We've just sent them out into deep end and said, figure it out. Not recognizing that some people already knew how to swim. And the role of this presentation is not really to cast blame at any single group or element in our society, but to hold us all accountable for having failed the most important, and this is arguable because you can challenge me, but the most important element of our society, our children. What is the impact of having been living in a pandemic for almost 2 years? So the pandemic hit our shores approximately in March 2020. We are now in October 2021. What has been the impact on our children? Many of our children, I dare say, has been left behind. They have been robbed of meaningful parent and caregiver interaction. They've been hidden away from social exchange, and they have been void of the socio-emotive support of their same age peers. When we think of typical, healthy, adaptive childhood development, we're thinking about supportive development along cognitive domains, physical domains, and socio-emotive domains. None of these domains are more important or integral than any other because they interconnect and support each other. And when we compromise or sacrifice one as being more meaningful than the other, we compromise the organism and its future sustainability as a whole. May I remind us that we are social creatures. Our humanity is epigenetically linked to our interaction with others. We learn to be humans through our shared engagement with other humans. Even more vital, children thrive off their interaction with other children. Children enter into humanity with nothing. John Locke spoke about tabula rasa, whether or not you want to subscribe to that thinking or not. Behaviorists speak about the role of the environment in shaping the human individual. So when young children enter into this world, they rely on their external interactions to shape them. And if they are locked away, void of those interactions, how can we comfortably not acknowledge that they must be impacted by this? We don't have to have science. We don't have to read any research. We don't have to undergo any studies to have an appreciation that there has to be an effect. Some children are privileged to be a part of large families, where there are multiple members, where their social needs are attended to. But there are many children that are only children, that are raised by single parents. You know, I want to remind persons that it is a given. You know, people say to me, but Ms. Rose, it is an expectation that we're going to experience stress. We're in a pandemic, of course. But did you stop to think that some people were experiencing stress long before the pandemic? So you're overwhelmed, you're struggling, you don't have your basic needs being met. And then a pandemic hits on top of that. In mental health, we talk about the deleterious impact of consistent stress, ongoing stress, chronic stress, stress that does not ease. And I'm a parent. And I remember my mother as a parent. And I remember gauging her as a child, knowing when to ask for things and not when to tell her bad things. Because when she was overwhelmed and stressed, that was not the time to engage her. Now, can you imagine how many of our children live in homes with parents who are stressed and overwhelmed and have no escape? Because that is it. Pre-pandemic, there was always an escape. If you felt overwhelmed by your child, there were supportive systems in place where you could take your child and leave your child and have a moment to refresh and regenerate and come back and be a better parent. But in a pandemic, there is no break. You're stuck with your children. And some of us might say, but they're your child, so of course you must be stuck with them. I want to defer, I want to argue against that. Because once again, parenting is not a singular act, it is a collective process. So when parents are overwhelmed and incapacitated and lacking in resources and support, how are the children who rely on the parents impacted? What does typical childhood look like? Peer engagement. How many of you remember playing Last Lick? Vexation that cause, touch a button. B word. If you ever say B word, you get a box, right? Dandy shandy, where you stuff up the box. And if that ever slap you, you stay slapped for a couple days well. Hopscotch. Chinese skip. So peer engagement. Ring games. How many of us, a lot of things we did not learn until we went to school? Free play, social stimulation, exploration of talents. When you're around your friends, it's that time you learn so you can DJ. And that time you learn so you can dance. Family engagement, generational interactions. I remember shelling out gungo peas with my grandmother, not because I wanted to, but I had to. And being terrified of the worms. I remember picking sorrel. It itch. But my favorite part of spending time with my grandmother was when she would bake. And I would get to lick the spoon. And my cousins and I would fight over licking the spoon. But we're in a pandemic where children cannot even visit their elderly grandparents. Because you want to protect the grandparents and you want to protect the children. So we don't think about the culture that is being lost. The passing off of these rituals and these activities where grandparents now fear their own children and children don't get to engage in that bond. Social stimulation, early structured academic instruction, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit more. And let us now compare childhood in COVID. Disruption of rituals, birthdays, celebration of achievements, traveling as a family. And traveling doesn't mean you leave in Jamaica, just going places. And I've heard many persons say, so what is the big deal if them can't celebrate a birthday? What is the big deal if you can't go to a graduation? You say that because you've already been afforded the opportunity to do it. Because you don't understand and appreciate what the big deal is. Closure of schools. We have to step away from this thinking and this belief that the sole purpose of school is chalk and talk and academic instruction. School is a primary agent of socialization, I dare say. It is school that we learn to engage in cooperative exchange and play. We learn to negotiate. We learn to be a part of a team. We learn delayed gratification. We learn to take turns. We sometimes even develop other social skills such as empathy, because we see individuals outside of ourselves who come from a different reality, having experiences that are new to us, and we're able to connect. We're not confined by the walls of only our households. Separation from peers. I have children, and they constantly say, I miss my friends. And some of us might feel like that's not anything to be concerned about. You know, I know some parents say, you have your siblings, you don't need nobody else. But I want to tell you that numerous studies exist that speak to the value and importance of friendships. Death of loved ones. A study released by the Center for Disease Control estimates that many children have lost a parent to COVID. In fact, I saw a figure like 1 in 300 and something children have lost a parent to COVID in the United States. That's a big deal. Reduced access to play. Not everyone has access to play. Not every child has a toy. And we might argue and say, but they can make a toy. But make a toy from what? Because maybe you don't even have the resources to make the toy. And let's say you have the toy. Where are you going to play with the toy? Because not all of our children live in spaces where it is safe to play. Most horrendously and heart-achingly, we all read and heard on the news of our toddler that was shot while she was in the confines of her house. So if no other instance brings to the forefront that not every child lives in a safe space where free and creative expression may occur, there is your evidence. Isolation. Can you imagine you're 7 years old or 8 years old or 9 years old or 10 years old, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and your parent or caregiver, gets up in the morning and they go to work. Maybe they leave out at 6 to beat the traffic, and they don't get back home until 7. And you've been home your entire day by yourself. How can we ever think that that is okay, that that is normal, that is healthy? But guess what? That is survival for many families. Increased responsibility. I'm hearing of more and more children that are responsible for their younger siblings. So they can't even focus on themselves. So you're at home in online schooling, but you also have to be present for your siblings' online schooling. And you have to get up and go and pick up the clothes off the line. You have to start the dinner, wash the dinners, the dishes, clean the house. So you're really not afforded the right to be a child and to be present in your learning space. So increase responsibility. Reduced academic support. How many of us recall going to school and not being clear in our understanding and being able to go and visit our teacher or go to the staff room or stay back in our lunchtime and get some degree of support? That no longer exists because our teachers are also burnt out. So they're limited in their availability. And once again, reduced access to protective services. Reports of child abuse have declined. I dare say not because child abuse has declined, but because there are less eyes to see the abuse and report it. So we have locked our children away to keep them physically safe. But what we have completely neglected is the other domains of their development and existence. Children have also had the organic support, the natural support of their caregivers compromised, because many caregivers are experiencing burnout from dual demands and reduction in their own internal emotional resources. I want to argue that the family is experiencing a collective burnout. So our homes are no longer spaces where we can leave everything behind and be present for our children. So many of us as parents, at the end of the day, we're so spent, there's nothing left to give. We can't sit on the floor and play. We probably can't even sit and have a meaningful conversation. We can't engage in basic interaction because we're exhausted. The cost of school closures on students' learning, health, and well-being has been devastating, according to a UNICEF report published in 2021. The repercussions for every child, their family, their community, and their economy will be felt for years to come. You see, some of us are very blinded, We don't recognize that there is something ahead of us. We only see right in front of our hands. So we have these plans that are for today, but we have not conceptualized or even begun to imagine the long-term experiences and impact. many children will never catch up. We fail to recognize that many children were not even going to school daily from day one because parents did not have the means and the resources. For some people, they're glad that school locked, because they don't have that stress to deal with. Because we fail to recognize that there are children who exist in spaces where their well-being is not a priority and their education is not seen as being valuable. School closures, according to UNICEF, impact every child. But the most vulnerable children are the hardest hit. Can you imagine preparing for examinations when you've never even really gone to school throughout the school year? Can you imagine being expected to learn under times like these? I want to tell us that we're wicked, but that probably is a very strong sentiment. Because we spend a lot of time investing in physical health. We spend a lot of time investing in all sorts of other things. But how many of us have acknowledged that this is a highly distressing time for our children? Parents are stressed out, so children must be stressed out too. And we expect those very same children to sit on the exam conditions and do their best and judge them and value them based on their performance. That cannot be right. Who has stood up for the rights of our children? And I want to tell you, it's the poorest children who have been the hardest hit. Because if your family has the financial means and resources, they can find somebody to come in and tutor you. But if your parents can hardly afford to even find food, how can they even support your academic goals? We must be fair. Primary schools have remained closed. But you and I know that there are many private spaces that have been open. And I am not upset with the private spaces. I applaud them because they're doing what they are supposed to do. But what about the rest of the society? What about the children that do not have those supportive beams? Prior to the pandemic, and I told you I was coming back to this, a UNICEF report recognized Jamaica as a model for early childhood development, with an almost 100% enrollment in early childhood institutions by the age of 3 years old. I went to school at 2. And most of my colleagues, my own children, went to school at 2. That is my appreciation and understanding. And I like to tell people, Jamaican parents don't send their children to school at 2 to really learn academics, because most children go to school knowing the academics already. Many of us would have taught our children ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, colors and shapes, and how to spell their name before they enter into the school doors. So that's not why children go to school so early. They go for social interaction. They go to learn how to be human beings, how to sit down, how to take turns, how to share, and how to develop social norms. It is a fact that early childhood experiences are important for lifelong outcomes. The early environment literally becomes embedded in the brain, and it eventually changes and takes place in society's architecture. When I was being trained as a clinician, we were always taught that children were less susceptible to the development of mental illness. Why? Because children have the affordance of self-care. Children play a lot, they daydream, they fantasize, they engage in make-believe, they take care of themselves. And that's a great thing, because we only spend a small portion of our time in childhood. But the foundation for our later survival is embedded within this period. We can visit theorists like Piaget and Vygotsky, and even the most controversial Sigmund Freud. They have all highlighted that the roots of adult stability are molded in childhood. If we destabilize the organism from its inception, then we sabotage its future success. The nutritional supplementation, psychosocial stimulation, and mental development of stunted children, a Jamaican study, demonstrated that children who received structured early childhood stimulation exhibited significant positive developmental gains along the cognitive domain. This study tracked individuals over a 20-year period and found that children who had participated in early childhood stimulation, in comparison to children who were not afforded the same privilege, went on to earn 25% more in wages on average. Various studies exist, and I can't compile them all. There's so much that have revealed a reduction in the emotional intelligence, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and emotional adaptability of children as a result of the ongoing distress associated with the ongoing pandemic. Children born during the pandemic score markedly lower on standard measures of verbal, motor, and overall cognitive ability, according to a study published in the British Medical Journal this year. This study looked at 672 children and has been ongoing since 2011. And what it found was that children who were born after the pandemic began yielded a decline in average IQ scores in comparison to children born before the pandemic. The researchers were able to rule out the direct effect of the virus. So we're not talking about people who have contracted the virus. We're talking about children who just exist during the pandemic. And what they proposed was that reduced interaction with parents and less external stimulation had significantly impacted on the meaningful and healthy development of children. Dr. Geneieve makes a very bold statement. He says, the closest thing we've seen in other research, in history, and he says this is not a good comparison to be making. He says, I'm going to be bold. He says this comparison is horrible. He says this reminds him of the orphans of Romania. And I don't know how many of you might be familiar with the story of the orphans of Romania, but Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu wanted to build the strength of his country. So he outlawed all contraceptives. And as a result of that, there was a population boom, but parents could not afford to care for their children. And the state went on to build many institutions to care for children. They even had a slogan that said, the government can take better care of your children than you can. When he fell from power, the atrocities of these institutions were laid bare. Thousands of children who were born without any disabilities became disabled because of reductions in stimulation. The exposure of the atrocities of Romania has influenced many studies on childhood development and the value of early stimulation. What we don't recognize is that all parts of our early experiences come together to build us as individuals. What are some of the determinants of early childhood development? Stimulation, health, early childhood education, and safety and protection. Children from vulnerable spaces are more likely to be subjected to inadequate care. Children exposed to abuse are more likely to develop mental health complications later in life. Children from vulnerable communities are less likely to be afforded the normal, rightful affordances of typical childhood. I often say that sometimes when children go to school, that is the only space where someone says to them, you are loved, or gives them a hug. You know, how many times we've heard stories of people who've only had a meal when they attend school or when they attend other spaces. Data tells us that the first 1,000 days of a child's life is the most sensitive and important period. There is massive development and growth in the central nervous system. And we have sensitive periods. What that means is that if we miss these periods, we miss golden opportunities to stimulate health and well-being later in life. What are the rights of the child? The right to go to school and learn is central to every child's development, safety, and well-being. UNICEF argues, but in many countries, supportive beams for families have not been re-engaged. However, and I want to jump on the bandwagon with UNICEF right now, You know, I laughingly said to my coworkers, and I'm laughing, you know, but it's a serious thing. I've seen people protest to not wear a mask, protest to not take vaccination, protest to open up church, protest to have party. People even protest to bury the dead. But none of us have protested for our living children. What a way we have our priorities, right? How do we move forward? We have to ensure that we safeguard the typical affordances of childhood. See our children as valuable members of our society, even though they don't have a loud voice and they don't have the right to vote. They do not have a platform to speak up on their own behalf, but they've been speaking. Who shall stand up for the children? Who will save the children? Engage all stakeholders, and I'm talking about parents and guardians from all walks of our society, schools and churches and community groups, in identifying practical strategies to provide more meaningful support for our parents so that they in turn can provide support for their children. And we need to start engaging in non-partisan dialogue as it relates to the reopening of school, because schools cannot continue to remain closed. And nobody has to agree with me on that, but I'm a parent. They cannot continue to remain closed. And the only way we can move forward is if we have an honest conversation about how we're going to do it. There are many empty buildings sitting around in our society that can be converted to help to facilitate safe and healthy learning spaces for our children. And as always, I'd like to remind everyone that there is no good health without good mental health. I want to thank you so very much for inviting me into your thoughts this evening and for listening to me. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Miss Rose, for this passionate, thought-provoking, informative, enlightening presentation. I'm sure as we went along, everybody was yes, and they could identify with it. And if we were to stage a rally right now, everybody would put up their placard. We want justice. We want justice. Yes. We want justice for our children. We want to ensure that they are not left behind in this pandemic. A lot has happened so far, but I don't think it is too late. Ms. Rose reminded us that parenting has never been a singular act. It has always been a collective effort. And so together, we want to come together with solutions and to actually make practical steps in ensuring that our children, who are an important element of our society, are not left behind. Ms. Rose said we are social creatures. Children thrive off their interaction with other children. And she also reminded us that school is not a place just for academic learning. I took note of something that I've been saying a lot, is that abuse is taking place, but the eyes are not there to see the abuse because the children remain at home. That is an unfortunate situation. But I'm so grateful that at the end, she came up with some steps forward. And remember, at the end of this, we are going to be making a commitment. We will prioritize the needs of our children. We will engage all stakeholders in identifying practical strategies to provide meaningful support for families and engage in non-partisan dialogue on reopening of schools. We have the opportunity now to ask questions. I have some questions that have been sent to me in the chat. And so, Ms. Rose, if you will be kind enough to respond to these questions. So question one, how can we bring awareness to the mental health of parents in this time?
My microphone is open, Audrey. Thank you so much for that question, Dr. Marcia Johnson-Campbell, and for the person who posed it. It's a wonderful question. I think we have to engage our other stakeholders like our churches or community groups. I find whenever we utilize or we identify these opportunities to speak and to share, people welcome it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a program on the television or the radio, but go where the people are. So if we're able to tap into those groups, those networks, then I think we can promote, mental health awareness for parents and how parents can take care of themselves so they're better able to conduct their role as parents.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure all of us will stand ready. So because schools are open, may not be face-to-face, and for every opportunity that there's a parent-teachers association meeting or some meeting to update the parents, we can step in and put in the mental health component. Every church meeting, every women's meeting, every past students association meeting. When we go out to give vaccines, every vaccination session, in the health centers, in the clinics, wherever we go, we need to put in a plug to improve the mental health of our parents. Other question, what are the recommendations or programs that are available to aid parents gain a better understanding of how to be more aware of their child's mental health? Do we have any formal programs that are in place?
That's a wonderful question. We actually do, Dr. Marcia Johnson-Campbell. We have active child and adolescent mental health clinics across the island. They are free of cost. All parents need to do is visit. We always encourage parents to visit their health centers or their primary care physicians and talk to your doctors or your nurse practitioners about what your concerns are. And they themselves have some degree of training where they're able to refer or route these children who need us the most into our child guidance clinics, as they're more affectionately called. We do not turn anybody away. And we really use it as an opportunity to empower our families. And you find out we have really good relationships with our clients who come. So if, as a parent, you feel that you need additional support, if there is something that you're very concerned with that is taking place in your child, you can reach out to these agencies. If you are not interested in public care, then the Jamaica Psychological Association has a list of qualified and competent persons who do provide these services at a cost. So whatever you are most comfortable with, there are many options. We have the Red Cross. I know some churches also provide counseling services. So if parents want help, you just have to reach out, because we don't know if you don't let us know.
Okay, is there any hotline that they can call?
I am getting that information. There is a hotline. It's being shared with me now. There's a mental health helpline, 888-633-NEW LIFE.
Okay.
188 New Life. My apologies, I'm giving lots of numbers. 188 New Life, yes.
Okay. All right, so there's this other question. What are some strategies that parents can use to cope during the pandemic period?
Oh, I love that question. So you want to make sure that as a parent, you're being very honest about how you're dealing with this. And I'm a big advocate for community social support. As parents, you must strive to have another parent friend. So we might have other friends that are not parents, but you must always have a parent friend. So personally for me, I'm a part of a group of parents, and we have been together from basic school, if you want to call it that. And our children are able to spend time together. We've been a source of support for each other during this difficult time. So you want to reach out to your community, to your parents, to your siblings, to your relatives, anyone that you think or you feel is going to provide support in a non-judgmental way. You want to talk about your stressor. You want to talk about how you're feeling. And you also want to take opportunities for self-care. Step away from the children every now and then, if you have that luxury. Allow yourself to miss them, as I like to say. When you go to buy something for them, buy something for yourself. Do something nice for you too. Because the research is telling us, if as a parent you are happy, then your children are happy too. If you are not doing well, then they're not going to do well. So we really have to take care of self so that we're in a position to take care of those who really need us, because they do need us. They can't survive without us. So, reach out for support, take time for self, and be a little selfish every now and then. Those are some strategies I would recommend.
Okay, thank you so very much. And I would add, in your self-care, remember healthy eating and exercise, absolutely important. All right, so what are some suggestions as to how can a student manage burnout and do well in school?
So I think, I've been very proud of our teachers. I found a lot of our teachers are really becoming more supportive of our children. So if you're feeling burnout as a student, the first thing I'd want to encourage is that you find a teacher in your space that you feel comfortable with. If you're not able to identify a teacher, maybe your guidance counselor, and to have an honest conversation about how it is that you're doing. Down here in the West, we've been engaged in a lot of guidance counselors and deans of disciplines and principals, and we've had very, very honest conversations like this year was not a good year for the child. They were unable to keep up with the demands of the online learning. So we've had some children who have repeated the year willingly, not from a place of feeling embarrassed or shame, but from a place of self-care, because it has been overwhelming for many children. So if you're feeling burnt out, you have to let us know, because we can't know if you don't share that with us. And that might be an opportunity to reach out and ask for a little bit more help, and you might have to step back. So sometimes we have to manage our expectations, and I've been saying that to parents and also to students. You might have been a straight A student pre-pandemic. The most important thing right now is not to be a straight A student, and that's for me. I know some parents are going to cringe when they hear me say that, but I think we have to get our priorities right. I don't think I want a child that is excelling, but is falling to pieces emotionally. So I'd much rather have the balance and the health in it. So now might be the time to make sure that, we're honestly evaluating what our capabilities and our capacities are, and where we're falling short, just to be honest about it, to say, I wasn't able to complete this assignment. How do I go about doing it? And I think most teachers are at a place now where they recognize that they also have to manage their expectations.
Yes, that is so true. Thank you very much for those strategies. How do we as students separate our school and personal life when the spaces are no longer separate?
Wonderful, and I've been hearing this one. You do need to separate it. You do need to separate it. You see, and this goes back again to privilege and luxury, because I've been hearing this from many children. I've heard children who've said that they now despise their cell phones and their tablets, because pre-pandemic, they were their social spaces, their downtime, their relaxation aids. They're now work, and they don't like it. And the fact that some children have to go to school in the same space that they sleep. And Dr. Marcia Johnson Campbell, you know this. In healthcare and in mental health, we tell our clients that the only thing that must be done in the space where you sleep is sleep, and other things, of course, right? Now, if you have to be doing the schoolwork in the sleep space, your brain is going to get confused. And what you might find, and I'm hearing this from adults and children, that at the end of the day when they should be winding down, they're not able to wind down because we really haven't changed space. So what can you do? If you are able to, find a different space to do the online learning. And I jokingly say to my kiddos, even if it means you have to do the online learning under the Aki tree. Mm-hmm. So you take it away from the space that you have designated for your emotional well-being. So if you have to sit down on the floor in the kitchen, or you have to catch up in the bathroom, or you have to go out on the veranda, make sure it's not somewhere that you go and call and talk to the neighbors though, right? You want to reduce the distractions, but as much as is practical within your space and your resources, try to have those spaces be separate.
Okay, all right, so listen, Ms. Rose, your presentation has invoked so many questions. I have another about 10 questions, but I think I will just give about 2 more minutes to this segment because we have to go into the panel discussion. So this question says, due to the current conditions of the world, what activities would you recommend parents and children partake in to de-stress and escape from the stress benefiting their mental health?
Wonderful.
could add this one to it. What are some strategies family members can use to rekindle the relationship they had
Right.
before burning out?
Wonderful. So if we can eke out times that are designated for family, that would be a big plus. And once again, parents who are listening, it's not about money. As a child, my mother did not have it, and we grew up without a lot. And I often say to people, I didn't even realize that we did not have it, because the material things were not the important things. So wherever there are safe spaces and opportunities, we can plan to go sit down and eat. Cook the Sunday dinner, cook the Saturday dinner, cook the Friday dinner, whatever it is. Pack it up in our little containers and go somewhere and sit and eat it and talk about our scenery. And we do have some beautiful spaces in all our parishes that don't cost anything to access. So that is one option. I've also said to parents, I remember when the pandemic hit, we started in my household, we started watching old cartoons. And I would tell my children, like, this is a cartoon Mommy loved when she was a kid, and they found it quite intriguing and interesting. We also went on to build a Chinese skip. I haven't done that in years. That was hilarious to see us jumping and failing, right? But this is an opportunity to go back to an earlier time, a less demanding time, a less stressful time. I want to say to parents there that there are little pockets of resources all around, bake a cake, cook a meal with our children, ask them to join us in the preparation of the meal. Make it a little fun. So sometimes we think, I remember a parent came to see me once, and it was her child's birthday coming up, and I asked her if they were getting a cake, and she said, Miss Rose, we can't afford that. And I said, well, if we can't buy it, we can bake it. And she said, she had never thought about that. And we spent the session looking at very simple recipes that did not require a lot of ingredients, because we know that, many things that we take for granted are really difficult for some families. But I want to just encourage parents, it does not take much to make a child feel happy. I've come to learn that. You can buy the most expensive toy and the child spends all the time playing with the box. Mm-hmm. And that is a common analogy. So, find little, the low-hanging fruits, not the big fruits, the low-hanging fruits. What are the little things that are around us? And I always say to parents, once again, find one family that practices your same health beliefs, because we all have varying beliefs, especially during this pandemic. A family that is not a busybody, they're not all over the place. A family that makes you feel comfortable, and engage that family so you can share the collective burden and experience the collective joy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So very good. My neighbor made banana bread on a stovetop recently, and I was quite impressed. So you can do all kind of things, even baking on top of the stove.
Wow.
Might be good. Thank you very much for those suggestions. I find going back to pictures also, looking back at old pictures and laughing at yourself.
Yes.
And we really want to not forget the other end of the spectrum, the older persons who are also vulnerable. Yes. Engage them and let them tell you the stories of yesteryear. So this question now is, how can we what intervention can be put in place to help children during the online process to still feel engaged as they were in school?
Can you repeat that one for me, please, Dr. Johnson Campbell?
What intervention can be put in place to help children during the online process to still feel engaged as they were in school, in face-to-face?
Right, so that's a difficult one, but it's a good question. I think if we're able to incorporate them, so give them tasks to do. I have seen my son's teacher have them do scavenger hunts. And very basic things, go and find something blue in the house, go and find something round, find the left foot of a shoe, and you'd be amazed at what difference it actually makes for the children. So I think, if we can engage the children more, it definitely, I think no more than ever, it cannot be chalk and talk. We can't just put up a screen and read the words. We have to reach out to them. I know some teachers, my girlfriend is a lecturer at the university, Miss Burke, and she shared with me that at the beginning of her lectures, she likes to play uplifting music for her students and ask them, like how their week was. And I know it might take a chunk out of her teaching time, but it really demonstrates intentionality in terms of caring for those who are relying on us in this type of space. So there are many things. I've seen teachers, put kids in groups and say, you're going to be responsible for teaching a particular lesson. And it might seem like a little thing, but it's really a big thing for these kids. So they become a
Okay.
little bit more a part of the learning, and they feel a little bit more present in the learning space, as I said, versus you just putting up the work and leaving it there. You know, that's a little bit more difficult to digest.
So in our discussion, we have to be engaging our teachers, our guidance counselors, and equipping them with tools as to how to deal with these situations. There was a question about how would you identify abuse while you are, if there are a way to identify abuse if the child is participating in online school.
That's a very difficult one. So unless the child tells you, or unless you as a teacher, and you see that's the challenge, most of our teachers have never met these students before. So you don't have pre-morbid history going on. You're not able to say Marcia was a gregarious girl and she was always laughing. You have never met Marcia before. And if you are in an online platform that has 30 kids in it, I don't see how you're going to be able to sniff that out. And we also have to be reminded that there are children where their teachers have never heard their voice, because online learning for them is a teacher sending a WhatsApp message to the parent's phone, and the parent then sending back what the child has completed for the day. So there are many children that have never heard their teacher's voice. They don't know the names of their classmates. There's no interaction or engagement at all. It's not personably. It's almost like it's very clinical, very robotic. It's not natural. And as I said before, we're social creatures. What is going to happen when our children have to go back into social spaces? How will they be able to socialize when they've not had any practice? So it's very hard for teachers and administrators to be able to pinpoint that something is going on. What we might have to go back to, I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Johnson Campbell. I know when I was a kid, they had truancy officers that would visit parents' homes if children did not come to school. We might have to go back to a place where we are visiting homes to check in on our children to make sure that they're okay. And some parents might say, you're very out of order, Miss Rose, that is an intrusion, but I dare say that we have a responsibility to make sure that we're checking in on all our children. But of course, that is going to demand a lot of resources, and we may not have a lot of that.
All right, thank you so very much. I wish we could go through all the questions, but the time is up on us. I'll just throw this one last one out for thought. Maybe you may not be able to respond. How do we get examination bodies that have a big part to play in our education to take the mental health of students and the impact of the pandemic on our learning seriously? I don't think they don't know. They do know, but yes.
I could be wrong. Right. I could be wrong, but I think we've made everything too much of a business approach. So everything is a business approach, and we forget about the humanness behind it. We as parents, we as educators, we as administrators need to stand up for our children and say, this is not the best option right now. If it were and I mean, you see, COVID is almost an invisible trauma because it's not like a tsunami or an earthquake. You can't see the devastation with your eyes. For some of us, some people can because they've experienced it in different ways. So because of that, we have an expectation of normalcy during a period of abnormalcy. So we need the parents to stand up and say, this is not the best option. And we have to come together collectively as a society. So if we don't speak up, the governing bodies, the examination bodies will continue to send the examinations because of the business of the examinations, and that will not change.
Okay. All right, thank you so very much, Ms. Georgia Rose, clinical psychologist and involved in so many other things, for your really inspirational, thought-provoking, passionate discourse on the topic, Innocence Under Arrest, Childhood in the Age of COVID-19 Pandemic. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, as we shift into part 2, I want you, wherever you are, to shift in your seats, wiggle your toes, wiggle your ankles, do the neck and shoulder roll. Remember, sitting isn't the new smoking, so we don't want to be caught up in physical inactivity. So wherever you are, do some stretches. We are going to move straight into part 2 of our seminar, and the panel discussion will be under the topic, My Body, Not Yours, the Adolescent's Right to Consent. We will be having 4 presenters, and each presenter will have 7 minutes to make their case or to share their perspective I want to introduce to you Dr. Sheila Campbell-Forrester, CD, MBBS, DPH. Dr. Sheila Campbell-Forrester is a former Chief Medical Officer in Jamaica and Regional Director for the Western Regional Health Authority. She was recently appointed member of the National COVID-19 Vaccination Operationalization Task Force and a member of the Friends of Mental Health Committee. Dr. Campbell-Forrester is a public health specialist and adolescent health consultant. She's a graduate of the University of the West Indies in Medicine and Public Health, and she was also a recipient of the 1997-98 Hubert Humphrey Fellowship in International Health and attended Emory University in Atlanta. She's a past dean of the All-American Institute of Medical Sciences and presently is an adjunct lecturer in adolescent health and advocacy at the University of the West Indies. Presently, she is the president of the Caribbean Adolescent Association for Health and advisor to the Duncan Tree Foundation. She's a lay pastor of the Montego Bay Mount Ward Circuit of Methodist Church. She's married to Edgerton and has 2 children and has mentored many others. Dr. Forrester loves to cook, bake, read, grow orchids, and have fun with her 2 precious grandchildren. In 2013, she was awarded the Order of Distinction in the rank of Commander Class by the Jamaican government for outstanding contribution to the health sector. And we welcome Dr. Campbell-Forrester. Also on the panel, we have Mrs. Geneive Harty. She's a civil practitioner and attorney at law, serving individuals and corporate entities in the areas of administration of estates, wills, conveyance, real estate transaction, commercial, and family law. Mr. Victor Newsome is an educator. He has been a teacher for over 27 years and a principal since 2009. He has led the Irwin High School since 2017. He holds a diploma in education, in business education from Bethlehem Moravian College, a Bachelor of Education degree in business education from University of Technology, Jamaica, and a Master of Science in educational leadership from Central Connecticut State University. Victor has a passion for working with students, especially boys who are from depressed and challenging backgrounds. His philosophy is to accept students for who they are and help them to become who they can be. And our other panelist is Mrs. Andrea Stennett Douglas, a proud wife and mother of 3 children, 2 boys ages 17 and 15, and a daughter who is 12 years old. She has been in the nursing profession for just over 30 years and currently serves as the Regional Non-Communicable Disease Surveillance Officer for Western Regional Health Authority. Colleagues, friends, persons on the platform, we welcome our panelists and invite them now to share on the different components in relation to this topic. I invite first, am I going in the order here? Mrs. Geneive Harty is to do a review of the legislation on the adolescent's right to consent. Dr. Sheila Campbell-Forrester will do cognitive development and the competence of the adolescent in decision-making. Mr. Newsome will give the educator's perspective of the impact of the adolescent's right to consent. And our parent, Mrs. Andrea Stennett Douglas, will share her perspective on the challenges and positives on the adolescent's right to consent. Let's give them.
Good. Dr. Campbell, good afternoon. I take it that I am starting this session. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Mine is a task to present on the review of the legislation on the adolescents' right to consent. And I'll be sharing the screen with the participants this afternoon. Okay, I hope are you seeing the screen? Sure. We'll share. Okay. All right, so here. Are you seeing the screen? All right. I'm not sure if the screen has come up because I'm not seeing it there. But in the context of the legislation, there's no legislation in Jamaica that actually defines an adolescent. So I'll take the definition of an adolescent from the World Health Organization. And according to the WHO, adolescence is a phase of life between childhood and adulthood. That is ages 10 and 19. The two legislation.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Harty. Could you go to slideshow and put it on slideshow for us, please?
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Right.
Slideshow from beginning. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is what the definition from the World Health Organization in how it defines an adolescent. Now, in Jamaica, the legislation, the Child Care and Protection Act and the Sexual Offences Act. Okay, so the Child Care and Protection Act and the Sexual Offences Act both define a child as a person under the age of 18 years and an adult as a person who has attained the age of 18 years. According to these two, Child Care and Protection Act and the Sexual Offences Act, they're both in agreement. Ambiguity of being an adolescent. They are both in agreement with how a child is defined. However, the very Sexual Offences Act, while Section 2 of the Act defines an adult and a child, the very Act, Section 8, subsection 1, defines a child to mean a person under the age of 16 years. Because this section of the Act, sexual offenses against children and indecent assault, is really looking at the issue of the age of consent. So one can say that there's ambiguity of being an adolescent, because if you examine it from the World Health Organization perspective, there is a confusion as to an adolescent in the Jamaican context could be considered both an adult and a child. And therefore, when we look at the concept of this seminar, my body, not yours. At the age of 16 years, the child is at a consensual age. So the child can get involved in sexual activities anytime anywhere with anyone. However, every decision to act all have a consequence. Now, what are some of the consequences of consent? Okay, so there is the issue of the child engaging in sexual activity. Now, Ms. Rose mentioned in her presentation before that children are at home, but nobody knows what is really happening with them. So abuses and these things can happen. Now, unless it gets to a case of a hearing before a tribunal or going to court, it could be a matter of he said, she said, because a child at 16 can give consent. But what if the child did not give consent? And it would be determined by the courts to make that decision as to that adult not getting consent, but therefore sexually molesting a child. There's also the issue of unplanned pregnancy. There's also the issue of a child being with child and wishing to have an abortion, which is an illegal action against the state and can get that child in serious problem. There's also the issue of sexually transmitting diseases. There's also that separation from school because you know become a dropout and there's a stigma that's attached to it. There's also the reality of separation from home because this adolescence is rejected by parents, the very partner who may get them pregnant if they're pregnant, and their peers. And then there are the social issues. The adolescent is uneducated, unemployed, can be homeless in some issues and become a dependent on the state. And therefore, in a dependency situation too, sometimes these adolescents find themselves being abused by the very partners. Now, these issues that faces adolescents, one has to carefully look at them because as an adult has certain entitlements and certain rights. Now, adolescents can engage in sexual activity according to what the legislation says. No, my body, not yours, so I can do what I want. However, even although you have that right to do what you want to do because it's your body, you don't have the right to determine governance in your country. You don't have a right to vote. You cannot even purchase alcohol or tobacco products. You cannot enter into a contract to be sued or to be sued yourself. And somebody under the age of 18 years definitely cannot get involved in legal employment. And you don't have the right to be registered as a property owner. So there are incompatibility issues that really requires legislative adjustments because an adolescent not having these entitlements of an adult, however, can partake in sexual activities, give rights to adult responsibility. So there are some issues that one really needs to look at. In this age of consent and this age at 16, where an adolescent does not have the capacity of an adult, however, are they protected legal, health-wise from other issue? And one has to ask a question, does the current legislation promote the rights and the best interests of an adolescent? Because the disparity is too wide, because while it is that you can engage in adult behavior, but at the same time, you have the inability to make life decisions. And I would want to say that sexual activities are best handled as an adult. I know some time ago, probably about 7 years ago, the Office of the Child's Advocate had made a presentation of allowing the age of consent to be the same of that of an adult. So 16 moves up to 18. So the disparity could be fixed then or addressed at that situation. The Parliament did not see that as an important factor. And looking at other jurisdictions and what exists, the age of consent at 16 is what happens in many countries worldwide. So legislation, the framers of the work in Parliament really needs to look back at these anomalies and how do we look at what legislations we have now, what the child care protection have, what the sexual offenses access, and how we create that balance. In one aspect of the legislation is saying a child is someone who's under 18 years, but for the offenses against the person, it is now at 16 years. Quite an incompatible issue which needs to be addressed. That is something that has to be addressed in law. And until we get to the question and answer section, I thank you for listening. That's the extent, because those are the only two legislation that really addresses the issue of the consent of a minor. Thank you all for listening, and I look forward to the other presenters.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Harty, for raising those issues, the incompatible issues. They can engage in adult behavior, but unable to make life decisions. We now invite Dr. Sheila Campbell-Forrester to do her presentation.
Western region for hosting this along with the university. I think it's very timely, and adolescence is an important time along the life course, impacted by childhood as it impacts the other age groups. I wanted to start this discussion of My Body, Not Yours, the adolescent's right to consent, looking at cognitive development and the competence of the adolescent in decision making, and to take a different approach. Mrs. Harty really did a good job of looking at the legal aspects, and that's a good segue into what I'm going to talk about. I'll start with a story, and it was when I was 15. I used to play hockey at school, and I injured my right hand. So I lived with my step-grandmother at the time, and she called someone at university to arrange for a doctor to see me. She didn't accompany me, even though I was a minor, but I guess she felt I was independent enough that I could answer any questions that they would ask me. It was not a major catastrophe. We didn't really think there were any broken bones, but it was quite albeit a serious injury. So on the flip side, I felt very disappointed that she didn't accompany me. And later, I would, however, appreciate that maybe, just maybe, she trusted me to handle that situation. You could say she was far advanced and in her thinking, although she didn't recognize what she had done. I was considered a minor with an evolving capacity to exercise my right to care. Legally, I didn't have the right of consent for any procedure since I was under 16, or rather under 18. I had not attained the age of majority where I would have the right to consent for myself to any procedure. If, however, my arm was broken, she would have needed to provide the consent for any procedures to be done. And that leads me to my slide, my first slide. Anyway, I'll go ahead. So we ask ourselves, what do we mean by cognitive development and competence in adolescence? And cognitive development means the development of the ability to think and to reason. The next slide. Go to the next slide. I'm not moving. My slide isn't moving. Okay. The ability to think and reason. It's just a big word that means just that. And adolescence marks the beginning development of more complex thinking processes. And they talk about formal logical operations. And it is the time when the adolescents think they know. They become invincible. They begin to think about new ideas, and they ask you all kinds of questions. It can also include the ability to consider many points of view and compare or debate ideas or opinions. And many parents will tell you about that. The next slide. So it can also include the ability to consider the process of thinking. Every adolescent, I want to say, is different, and we need to recognize this, and progresses at their own rate in developing their ability to think in more complex ways. And this is also dependent on the stage of adolescence, whether it be early, middle, or late, whether it has to do with the socio-cultural and economic context in which they live, and whether it has to do with mental ability. You have to think about, are they differently abled? Do they have special needs? So all that can affect their thinking ability, and sometimes we have ways of labeling our adolescents. They're too argumentative, right? And there's some of them you're not thinking. So with all of those, then we realize that cognitive development is just not the same for every single adolescent. So what does it mean when we talk about competence in adolescent decision making? And based on research, they've come up with 9 indicators. And these indicators, the first one which you can't see is choice. How does the adolescent make choices? And we know that this can be really a challenge for adolescents sometimes, especially when we think, even in terms of whether to smoke or not to smoke, whether to drink alcohol or not drink alcohol, whether to have sex, and it goes on. Then the second one is comprehension. Do they comprehend what is happening? How is their level of comprehension? There's creativity. How creativity? Does the adolescent think in terms of creativity? How can they solve this problem? Then there's compromise. Are they making compromises? And consequentiality. What are the consequences, the results? Is it correct? Is it credible? Do they tell little lies, for instance? Is it consistent? And are they committed? So all of those make up some questions that are asked and you use to decide whether an adolescent is competent in their decision making. And so the next slide, if we look at it, by age 15, many adolescents will show a reliable level of competence in decision making. In fact, they really think that they know it all by then. And there is creative problem solving, correctness of the choices they make, and commitment to a course of action. Of course, all that has to be taken in context, because if you don't have an environment where that is promoted at home, at school, then you know that the adolescent may not reach that level to show that reliable level of competence. When we look at the younger adolescents, 12 to 14, they are less able to create the options, to identify a wide range of risks and benefits, and to foresee the consequences of alternatives, as well as to gauge the credibility of information from sources with vested interests. And in truth and in fact, at that age, we still have to be protecting them. After 15, we still have to have a measure of protection. So what are the barriers to achieving competence in decision-making during adolescence? And we talk about attitudes. And parental attitudes are coming here as well, because there are some beliefs about what is the proper age for making certain decisions. And then there are the educational levels. And we complain, because we think that in terms of reasoning and critical thinking skills, that's not necessarily up to par in our communities. There's peer pressure, and that peer pressure may be you have to conform, you're part of a gang, part of a group, and that can affect your competence in decision making. If there is breakdown in the family structure and functioning, and we heard a lot about restricted legal rights to make important decisions. So those are some of the barriers that can affect competence in decision making. I think that's my last slide, but I will go on to speak some more and to say that cognitive development and competence in adolescent decision making has to be on a case-by-case basis. As we said, every adolescent is different. The parent still has a responsibility to ensure that care is appropriate and ethical, and the nature of the procedure is considered in the best interest of the adolescent, who is a minor under age 18. It is interesting that there is a disparity, as you heard, between the age of consent and the age of majority. And this really needs to be sorted out. So I won't go back into this. And there are some decisions that will be of a multidisciplinary nature. depending on the presenting situation. For example, if you have an adolescent who is mentally ill, where the adolescent may not be able to understand what's happening or be competent at that moment in time to make decisions for themselves, then someone has to step in and make that kind of informed decision about their care. The competency of the adolescent to exercise their right in participating, with regards to their health in that particular case is questionable. Now, Jamaica has signed on to the Convention of the Rights of the Child. We have ratified it. And I must add that in Article 24, it adds that a child has the right to the best health care possible. And it includes safe water to drink, nutritious food, a clean and safe environment, and information to help them stay well. And we should never assume that adolescents do not understand their rights. In fact, in speaking to some of them, they do know what their rights are. But if they don't, it is our responsibility to give them the information, to make them literate, and so they can use the information in making decisions, informed decisions when they do have to. And so I want to get to what are some of the challenges we face and how do we address them. The family doctor, the nurse practitioner, the pediatricians, and other healthcare workers, the psychologists, see adolescents all the time. They mainly come with their parents, and they're not going to confide in you with their parents in tow. That's a given. There are parents who would want to be present in every encounter, but health workers must also respect the rights of the adolescent to privacy and confidentiality. And it's our duty of care to ask the parent politely to allow us to be with the adolescent so that we can interview them. Then we negotiate with the adolescent to what it is that we may have to discuss with the parent, creating a safe and confidential space and an appreciation for the situation. So, it is important for us to recognize that right, even when the law is saying that you cannot consent until you reach age 18. Now, I've been faced with situations where an adolescent who is undergoing a health crisis pleaded with me not to tell our parent about the situation. However, if the risk outweighs the benefits, the decision has to become an inclusive one, and this must be clearly explained to the adolescent up front as a policy, and that including the parent in that situation is for their own health, safety, and welfare. Usually the adolescents will relent, knowing full well that parent may not be happy about the situation. Now, I had a situation where a 15-year-old turned up at the hospital. She was 8 months pregnant. She had never been to an antenatal clinic. Her mother didn't know she was pregnant, as she concealed it well. But she now had serious complications and some anxiety and needed to be admitted to hospital. I had to inform her that her mother needed to know, and in spite of the daughter's plea, I had to tell her. Now, this was a matter of life or death. Needless to say, mother was both embarrassed and upset, but the decision had to be taken. And, there's a landmark case that I wanted to just mention, and it's called the Gillick Fraser Competency Test. And it exists in Britain and in some Commonwealth countries. And I see where some countries in the Caribbean have been trying to include this in their legal arguments. And it is called the Gillick-Fraser Competency Test. And it is used to determine whether a child 16 years or younger can consent to his or her own medical treatment without the need for parental permission or knowledge. And the test requires answers to about 8 factors to determine if the adolescent is competent to receive such treatment or services without parental consent. And the test allows discretion by the doctor, for instance, in the case of prescribing contraceptives without parental consent, while directing the use of this discretion along strict guidelines. And I hope that Mrs. Harty can help us with that one. So, you know, the whole matter of cognitive development and also competency are important. So I spoke about evolving capacity of the adolescent, but there's another word that is used where you are an emancipated minor. You're able to make decisions, credible decisions on your own. I just want to make 2 more points and then stop. So cognitive development is important in the adolescent. I am concerned and want to agree with Ms. Rose in terms of the impact of schools being closed. And I believe that cognitive development may be impacted by this, and the lack of cognitive development may in fact affect generations. And it is for us to also encourage parents during this time to help to stimulate thought, to do some simple things, have conversations with the children, ask them questions, you know, let them answer. The family discussions, use the opportunity to have the family meetings around the table, you know, encourage reading and comprehension. Let the children tell you the stories that they've read. And the whole matter of playing games together and so on are important. And we recognize that we have lost some children. Some have actually dropped out of school. And you know, it is important that we work with our parents, because parenting has no blueprint. And many of our parents have never been exposed to parental classes. So, you know, we have to be sensitive to what is happening in terms of helping to build that cognitive development and that critical thinking and reasoning in our children, to help them to become competent in the choices they make and in the decisions that they have to make, especially about their health and their education and their future. So I am going to stop there. I just want to say we want to create a wholesome adolescence, and all of this, it's important that we become advocates for the changes that need to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Forrester. We recognize your passion for this area. You are no longer an adolescent, but you certainly have them at heart. Went a little bit over time, but we will press on and appreciate your comments. We recognize that all adolescents are different, and so assessing cognitive competence must be done case by case. And you would have given us some very useful tips as to how to improve their competence in making decisions and choices. The educator of 27 years is with us. He has interacted with adolescents for all these years and continues to do so. Mr. Newsome, it's your turn to give us your perspective.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening to share with you in this forum. I must also say that Ms. Rose's presentation, it has really hit me hard as an educator, and I use that term loosely, in that as a principal and not being able to have your students coming in for teaching and learning, and to have gone through a year and 6 months of online school and seeing the impact that it has had on students learning. It is really of great concern to us at Irwin High School and our 1,287 students that we have in our care. In the interest of time, I'm just going to share a Word document that I am going to just take you through. I hope you're able to see my screen. So the age of consent and the educator's perspective. So educators are guided mainly by 2 acts related to how we interact and care for our students: the Education Act and the Child Care and Protection Act. Our responsibilities as educators are to ensure that we provide a caring, safe, and nurturing learning environment for all students. Our students need to be educated and must feel comfortable during the process. All students have voices in the process of decision making. And I think as educators, giving our students a voice, having them being a part of the decision making which concerns them is very important. We cannot make decisions regarding students in isolation. All the decisions that are made in school are for the students. So it is important that we include them in the decision making. The Education Act speaks to the government's responsibility to educate all children from age 4 to age 16. Recently, through an act of parliament, changes have been made which now see the government having responsibility to educate children from kindergarten to age 13. So that is the new K-13 program that the government has now implemented. And in this program, sixth form has now become mandatory. And there are 3 different categories of the sixth form program. We have the traditional program, and we have a pathway 1 and a pathway. So traditional is the pathway 1. We also have the pathway 2 and the pathway 3 programs. So K-13 is now mandatory, which means that children from age 6 months to age 18 years, the government has now taken on that responsibility to educate children between that age group. So how do we perform our role as educators, knowing that these statutes guide us? In the Child Care and Protection Act, Section 2, the Act states that the Act shall be interpreted and administered so that the best interest of the child is the paramount consideration and in accordance with the following principles. Now let us look at subsection 3A It says children are entitled to be protected from abuse, neglect, harm, and threat of harm. So whose duty is it to protect a child of 16 years? Should it be the child's responsibility, or is it the duty of the responsible adult who has the child in his or her care? Are our children, based on what the doctor just said, and the development of our children, should we really be given all our 16-year-old children that responsibility where their development is concerned and decision making are concerned? As educators, we do not make decisions to govern students in isolation. There is the avenue for involvement through the school board on which a child sits, or should I say a student, who is a member of the student council body. These decisions are in accordance with the Education Act, the ministry's guideline, and the bulletins. So our students already have participating privileges. For example, when a decision is made on dress code or grooming, the student is part of the team that makes that decision. So I think that a participatory type of decision making, which involves children, is what is important. And have our students understand, based on evidence, why it is important that adults are involved in the decision making process, and that a child at 16 is not necessarily ready to make all decisions concerning his or her life. We must allow our students the input to make decisions that govern their lives through dialogue and conversation. I must say that I fully support the government decision to provide education for children up to age 18. So should the government ensure that persons under 18 years cannot consent to any act that is not seen as a need for the child, then why should we allow our children to have consent at age 16 for some things, as was said previously, and not for other things? How do we determine maturity as it relates to subsection 3D, which states that where the child is of sufficient maturity so as to be capable of forming his or her own view? These views should be taken into account when decisions relating to the child are being made. We're all aware that not every child matures at the same age. So if we say then at age 16, we should give consent for a number of activities where children are concerned, especially sexual activity, are we saying that not all children at age 16 should be given that responsibility, knowing that children mature at different age groups? Take, for example, boys who mature at a later age than girls. Think of all the possibilities that exist where the life of a 16-year-old is concerned. Should he or she be considered mature to be given all of these privileges? But what if we should focus on the rights of the child, specifically their provision rights? These rights guarantee the basic things that children need for their survival, growth, and development. Are we saying then that the changing of the age of consent will be more beneficial to the children's survival, growth, and development if we should allow our children at 16 to be involved in more decision making independently? Are we saying then that it will be beneficial to them for survival, growth, and development? If so, how much leverage are we allowing our children in making these decisions? Will their input be morally acceptable based on influences around them? Or are we going to have these types of conversation on what the age of consent should be as children become more exposed? We know that with the advent of the internet and the access to information, children are becoming more exposed and are understanding more about functions and how things work and situations as it relates to them. As they become more exposed, is it that we are going to continue to have discussion that we need to give them more independent? So that is a concern. My view is that participation is key in the process, but we cannot allow our children to only dance to the beat of their own music. We must look at all the factors, be it moral, spiritual, social, and otherwise, before we make the decision on what the age of consent should be. That is my view as an educator. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Newsome. Really thought-provoking and many questions that you have asked. How much leverage are we allowing our children in making decisions? And he believes participation is key in the process, but we cannot allow our children to only dance to the beat of their own music. Thank you so very much. And so we invite our final panelist, our parents, Mrs. Andrea Stennett Douglas, to give her perspectives.
Okay, good afternoon. All right, good afternoon again. I am presenting, I'm honored to be presenting tonight on the topic, My Body, Not Yours, the Adolescent's Right to Consent, looking at the challenges and the positives of a parent on adolescents' right to consent. Wow. Okay, so I chose to look at the right to consent by looking at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child and looked at the various articles and what they discussed. And a lot of what I'm going to say has come out already, but from a parent's perspective, I will continue. So I looked at Article 12, and it says, children have the right to say what they think should happen to them or should happen when adults are making decisions that affect them and should take their opinions into account. I agree as a parent, yes, and we do that. However, I believe that good parental guidance and stable family relationships are necessary when raising well-adjusted adolescents. And, you know, like Dr. Campbell-Forrester shared, how adolescents like to ask questions and they debate everything. I have some who should, I think, be on a debate team somewhere. They debate everything. And so it makes for very interesting discussions in my house, sometimes leading down a road that could lead to war, but you know, we contain it. I also believe, though, that guidance is necessary in engendering in them an appreciation for lawfulness. And, you know, we're looking at in the home. For example, I'm not going to be consenting or allowing any adolescent to be smoking in my house because I'm asthmatic, and that is going to affect my health. So yes, it is their right to choose, but it's not going to happen in my house. and they need to be taught as well. You know, what are the benefits or the dangers surrounding a choice that they want to make, and therefore we have the discussion so they make healthy choices. We look at their, you know, lawfulness in society. It's not appropriate for them to violate the rights of others. So therefore, I would not encourage or allow, and we have discussions around, you know, the appropriateness of violating the rights of others. Just as much as they have rights, others have rights too. And then when you look at the legal aspects of it, you know, every legally violated rule has implications and penalties. And we have taught them that, you know, I'm not one of those parents that's gonna shield them from whatever, you know, consequences they have to face because of the decisions they make. So we encourage them to make decisions, yes, but remember that there are penalties surrounding decisions. So while acknowledging my adolescents' rights to consent, I also find that it is important to instill in them the need to recognize my rights as a parent, and to note that my rights might very well be complementing their rights, right? So as parents, we have to provide shelter, we have to provide transportation, we have to keep them safe. We have to provide for their nutritional needs, we have to provide care for them, and including healthcare, yes, and cultural norms. We have to teach them about what's appropriate and what's not, and appropriate clothing. Now that's our big discussion in my house. Yes, what's appropriate to wear inside and outside, and proper conduct in school, you know. And even though they're online for school at the moment, yes, I agree that, you know, they're in a different environment, but I like to maintain that they be appropriate when joining online, you know, and to teach them, you know, if you were in school, you would not be able to do those things. So practice to do it properly, because when you have to go back to school, you have to conform. So if school says no braids, no whatever, I am sticking to that. While school time, you'll be appropriate for school. Right? In public spaces, how do you behave? You know, how do you act? What kind of decisions do you make or need to make at home, with friends, and also among other adults? What are the, Miss Rose talked about the educational requirements and achievements. Yes, I agree that, you know, we have to bear in mind that this is not normal times and normal space, but there have to be some rules or some expectation, that's probably the word, some expectation in terms of what the educational requirements and achievements should be, so that they don't necessarily fall below their capacity or their capability, right? In Article 14 of the convention, it states that they have a right for religious and spiritual views and other related issues, and we do encourage for them to express themselves in that way as well. So now there's the right to privacy, and that's in Article 16. And I agree, they have a right to privacy. One of the rules in my house is that you do not lock the door. Yes, you can close the door, but don't lock it, right? We must be able to get to you in the event that there is a problem or a challenge in your room. So you don't lock the door. You have your right to close your door for a moment or so, but not to be locked away. But we also have the responsibility to guide them about their right to privacy, and therefore not having others infringe on that right. And so we have to teach them about, you know, how they relate to their family members, how they relate to strangers, and what that right to privacy entails. Right, so we're looking at Article 6, which says they have the right to a full life. And yes, I agree, right? But there are certain things that will probably lead to some challenges although we need to guide them in the decision-making process around like things like, when is it best to get a tattoo? What kind of body piercings can I have? That kind of thing. Big discussions, lots of big discussions around those topics. And whether it's appropriate or not, what age, personally, those are not my choices, but we have to have the discussions. Appropriate dress again. What's appropriate when you're going on the road with which friend, what age groups. But my friends are doing it, that's fine. But what are my views on the matter and what are their views? And we have a discussion. Attending places and events and recreation for hanging out with friends. Again, the friends and the peer pressure comes in. So for example, we have discussions on smoking and drinking and appropriate ages for doing so, and how much is too much and that kind of thing. Right? Dating and those related concerns. Wow, we have some real serious discussions on those. And so therefore we have to guide them on, what's appropriate. And so yes, it might be their body and their right, and they can choose, but there needs to be some appropriateness in terms of, and guidance in terms of doing it. Curfews and limitations. We have been living under government imposed curfew for such a long time. So yes, I understand when Ms. Rose talk about them being locked away and the house is not a comforting place anymore because it has become like a prison. My daughter hates staying home, but everywhere I go, every time I jump in the car, Mommy, can I come? It's always, we always have to have that discussion about limitations of travel and what have you. And also, if they have to go out, when looking at post-COVID, what are the limitations? You may have curfew. When do you come back in? What's an appropriate time? Who do you work with? We have to have all those discussions. Right, so with all that said, it begs the question then, how does it really affect a child or an adolescent if there's a delay in that decision making? Because sometimes you kind of get the feeling that they're going to die if they don't make that decision right now, if they don't get that, what they want in terms of their right to consent. So the key, however, though, is for them to understand that the decision is being made in their best interest, and that is what is foremost, right? And most important is, what is the best decision for me now at this point, and is it in my best interest? We, though, don't tend to shield them from everything. So yes, there is some amount of leeway in making some decisions, providing their own consent to certain things within reason. But if it results in failure, then that becomes an opportunity for them to learn about consequences. Right? We don't shield them from learning about certain consequences. And we hope that, having gone through that experience, then it becomes a basis for better decision-making later on and for building character. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of, from a parent's perspective, regarding the right to consent. I thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so very much. I can hear some people saying, while you under my roof, you do what I say, or not over my dead body. But we are very glad that there's an opportunity for discussion, and we recognize that with rights comes responsibilities, and you cannot infringe on the rights of other persons, even as you seek to have your own rights. Thank you so very much to all our panelists, Geneieve Harvey, Campbell-Forrester, Newsome, and Stennett Douglas. And so we have some amount of time. We said we were gonna conclude at 7:30. We're almost there, and we still have a few more things to do. We acknowledge our sponsors and really, really thank them for supporting us at this time. But let me go to the questions quickly. It doesn't, well, these questions don't really say who the question is for, but starting at the bottom with the age of consent changed to 18 in the future. Dr. Campbell-Forrester or Mrs. Harty, do you have a response for that? And maybe host, you might have to unmute several mics at the same time so that it might be easier. Will the age of consent change to 18 in the future? There's a question about the helpline for child abuse victims. And I'm going to ask if the team can post the helpline number in the chat. What does the process entail in changing the age of consent, and how do we as Jamaicans push for this?
The age of consent is a matter for Parliament to contemplate. It is something that has been looked at in 2014, and the decision was not made to change it. I'm sure in order for it to be changed, persons would have to make submissions, because it would have to be something where the Parliament has been petitioned that this is an important and critical matter that needs to be addressed. And like I said, those incompatibility issues where the ages and different legislation actually defines a child at different stages and different ages. So that's a matter for Parliament to address, but that is something that civil society would have to make a presentation to Parliament, and the arguments have to be that strong to convince the legislators that this is something that needs to be rectified and that anomaly dealt with immediately.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Campbell-Forrester, would
I just want to
add to that?
Yeah, just to add that yes, you can advocate, but you need to also look at what are the risks and the benefits of changing the age and come with a very strong argument to Parliament. And one of the reasons why it hasn't changed is because there's disagreement.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So the next question is, how do we help these children when the parents themselves will attack you for correcting or trying to guide them?
I think you have to help the parents first. I think a number of our parents need to be educated on how to be very good parents. Parenting seems to be lacking in a number of homes. And I think as a school, I know we have taken on that responsibility somewhat through our guidance department. But I think a number of our parents, what the pandemic has done is that it has shed some light on the situation that a number of parents are lacking where parenting are concerned.
Thank you. How can adolescents with more authoritarian or strict parents practice their agency? Not sure I understand that part. But again, how do we help our adolescents? Let's say, how do we help our adolescents who have very strict parents who are authoritarian? So they're the ones that say, not under my roof, not happening. And there's no place for discussion. Mrs. Stennett Douglas, maybe you can give some advice.
Okay, I think for parents who are very authoritarian, they probably need to, they need to definitely spend some time, more time understanding the adolescence, the period, and what is needed in guiding them. The stricter you become, the more harsh you become. You know, the harder they come, the harder they fall. Right, the stricter and the more harsh you become, the more resistant adolescents tend to become, or they become very, what's the word? Subdued. And not develop into the wholesome individual that you want them to be. So parents need to understand the whole process of adolescence so that they don't overreact. Yes, and to remember, a lot of times we forget that we were adolescents too, you know, and we did some things or thought some things or made some decisions that were not, you know, our parents were not in agreement with. And we don't have to do everything that, you know, our foreparents did to say, this is how I grew up and it never killed me. So, you know, but we're not saying that you're to let go the reins. We're just saying, try to understand your adolescent a little more so that you're able to act appropriately in that time to guide them as best as possible.
I think sometimes too, we have to, school is a good place to pick up some of the behaviors. And when they pick up the behaviors, it's to find out from the adolescent what is happening. And this might be an opportunity for guidance counselor, principal, to begin to have a conversation with parents, because one of the symptoms of that is an angry child, an antisocial behavior that may be seen, you know. So again, it goes back to parenting. If that could be one of our objectives in this country, parenting right across the society, because it doesn't, rich people have parenting problems, poor people have parenting problems, rural people, urban people. If we can find a way to reach parents and help them to understand the basic principles even of parenting, I think that would make a great difference.
That is true. I think we need a school for parents, right? Mrs. Harty, there's a question here for you. Since our laws allows age for consent for sex at 16 years, is this not promoting child marriages?
Even although the age for consent is at 16 years, it doesn't necessarily mean it's promoting child marriages, because if you're getting married at that age, the parents still have to give consent. And that's what one of the things where I said, when you look at the things that a 16-year-old can do and engage in, but at the same time, they do not have the entitlements of an adult. And that will be one of them, because somebody who's at the age of 18 does not need their parents' consent to get married. They can just go ahead. So child marriage in that case still is going to require parental consent for that marriage to be, let's say, legal then, in every sense of it. Unless the person were not being married in the sense and in other religious rights that does not recognize the law in those instances. But if it is something that is the law is going to recognize, then they're still going to need the parents' consent.
So just for clarity, do we recognize marriages of children or persons under 18 with consent of parents? That happens here in Jamaica?
There would have been probably very rare cases, but it can happen. Okay. If once the parents give the consent. Mm-hmm. And of course, the consent would not be limited to an oral consent. It would probably be something that needs to be reduced to writing. So when it is tested, then the evidence is there to sufficiently justify that kind of marriage.
Okay. All right. I thank you all so very, very much. And we can recognize and see how this dilemma of adolescents' rights and responsibilities and the incompatibilities can cause mental anguish and distress, even more so in this time of the pandemic. And we want to, together as a community, look for ways as to how to help both parents, adolescents, children, teachers to cope, how to make those decisions, make those competent decisions, and do what is best in the interest of all. I want to thank you all for participating in such a rich and fulsome discussion, and certainly very enlightening and informative. And I say thanks to the Western Regional Health Authority Mental Health team. I will now hand over to the person who is going to do the vote of thanks. I don't know if I'm to hand back over to Dr. Owe, who started out with the introduction, or it will just go straight to vote of thanks. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen.
Information that was. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to extend heartfelt gratitude to all of the participants. You have made this evening's proceedings a success. Thanks for providing the insights and information necessary. You have galvanized us into a call of action to stop the inequities that now prevail in mental health. Let each of us now go forward to do our part in decreasing the inequities that now prevail. Heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Osazi Owe, who commenced with the introduction and set the stage for the audience to yearn for more to come. Special thanks to our moderator. Special thanks to our moderator, Dr. Marcia Johnson Campbell, who is the coordinator of the Non-Communicable Disease Program at the Western Regional Health Authority. Dr. Johnson Campbell provided a warm welcome to all and also set the stage for an exciting evening with our opening remarks. Special thanks to Ms. Georgia Rose, our clinical psychologist, who highlighted the need for advocacy to protect our children's rights and hence their mental wellness. Ms. Rose's presentation was very enlightening, informative, and was very well articulated. The panel discussion was very interactive and enlightening and gave us a lot of food for thought. The discussions highlighted the need for adolescents to know their rights and how they make informed decisions. Special thanks again to Dr. Marcia Johnson Campbell, who also moderated the panel discussion and who facilitated for a lively discourse. Special thanks to our panelists, who were very informative and articulative. Thanks to Ms. Geneieve Harty, attorney at law, Dr. Sheila Campbell-Forrester, public health consultant, Mr. Victor Newsome, principal of Irwin High School, and Mrs. Andrea Stennett Douglas, who gave her perspective from a parent's point of view. And thanks to our lovely audience for being so attentive and who allowed us to share valuable time virtually. I know how challenging it can be to stay attentive during virtual presentations. Thanks to our organizing committee, headed by our regional psychiatrist and chief of staff, Dr. Elizabeth Crosman, Ms. Georgia Rose, Nurse Geneieve Foster, Ms. Melissa McHale, Ms. Andrea Irwin, Ms. Jody Marie Hastings, Ms. Marlene Robinson, Dr. Janice Clark, Dr. Gavin Austin, Dr. Gerin Austin, Dr. Nori McKnight, and Dr. Osazi Owi. The organizing committee worked tirelessly to make the activities thus far a success story. Last, but by no means least, I would like to thank our sponsors. Special thanks to Mr. Wayne Manning of Pfizer for his very informative presentation. We look forward to using our products for the betterment of mental wellness. Also, thanks to our other sponsors, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Pan American Health Organization, Kiwanis International, Sagicor, the National Health Fund, Ministry of Health and Wellness, the University of the West Indies, Fairfield International Academy, Discount Lumber and Hardware, Mafisanti Builders, Dr. Dwayne Harvey, Dr. Daniel Jones, Sharon Palmer, Dr. Marshawn Reed, and Roderick Jarrett. Thanks again to you all for participating. Looking forward to your continued support for the rest of the week and for the next annual staging of Mental Health Week. As the saying goes, there is no good health without good mental health. Have a good evening. Godspeed.
It would be remiss of me not to say thank you to Dr. Arlene Wilson and also to our IT team. Yes, we want to thank you all for being a part of our mental health conference for this year, Western Region. We know you have supported us in all manner and all the times that we have been here. These are unprecedented times, and we have looked at the theme, mental health in an unequal world, the have and the have-nots. How did we get here? We had some fantastic speakers, and if you were not a part of the discussions from Sunday until now, we invite you to visit us on YouTube and re-watch some of us or watch them for the first time, but we invite you to participate in that realm. We know there are lots of food for thought, and we are hoping that with some resources, with some partnerships, we'll be able to make mental health awareness even more in our country and in the region. So we look forward to the participation, we look forward to the collaboration, and we look forward to seeing you next year, this time, Mental Health Week. Remember, it is celebrated around World Mental Health Day, October 10th, yearly. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next year. So long.